All right, today we are diving into one of the most game-changing stories in the entire New Testament. We're talking about Acts chapter 10. This is the moment where a single, really bizarre vision given to the Apostle Peter just completely rewired the early Christian faith and set it on a course to become a global movement. And it all kicks off with this wild question. How in the world did a dream about a big sheet full of forbidden animals end up changing everything? How did it redraw the boundaries of faith and family for an entire religion? Well, to figure that out, we've got to understand the world this whole story takes place in. You see, to really feel the shock of what happens in this story, you have to get your head around the world Peter was living in. It was a world with this deep, uncrossable line drawn in the sand, a line between Jews and non-Jews, or as they were called, Gentiles. But, it wasn't super black and white. In the first century, Jewish attitudes toward Gentiles were actually all over the map. On one side, you had Jews who were all about integrating. They believed their God was the God of all nations, and they wanted to build friendly, even collaborative relationships. But on the other end, you had those who resisted any contact at all to maintain their ritual purity, seeing Gentiles as idol worshippers. And Peter, he's living right smack in the middle of all this cultural tension. And this is where we meet our first main character, a guy named Cornelius. He was a Roman centurion who fit into this really specific category known as a God-fearer. Now, these were non-Jews who were just deeply drawn to the God of Israel. They prayed, they gave to the poor, they tried to live right, but they always knew there was this wall they just couldn't cross. They were sincere seekers, but they were on the outside looking in. So the story really gets going with a bang, a full-on divine intervention. An angel shows up to Cornelius. And listen to what the angel says, that his prayers and his charity have ascended as a memorial before God. Basically, God has noticed him. The angel then gives him a pretty simple instruction. Send for a man named Simon Peter. And just like that, one side of our story is in motion. But here's the thing. This isn't just a one-sided event. While Cornelius's men are on the road, God is preparing the other side of the equation. This whole thing is a divine setup, a plan that's unfolding in two different cities with two very, very different men. Okay, so the scene shifts over to Peter. He's up on a rooftop praying when the text says he falls into a trance. Now, that word trance is way more important than it sounds. This isn't some kind of medical seizure or him just passing out. It's a very specific, historically loaded term. The Greek word they use here is eckstasis. Now, for any Jewish person who knew their scriptures in Greek, this word would have been like a giant flashing sign. It's the exact same word used to describe the deep sleep God put on Adam when he created the first family. And even more importantly, the deep sleep that fell on Abraham in Genesis 15, right at the moment God was making his covenant with the nation of Israel. You can totally see the pattern the author is laying out for us, right? They're deliberately connecting what's about to happen to Peter with the most foundational, world-defining moments in all of Jewish history. First Adam, then Abraham, and now Peter. Something huge is about to happen. A new, expansive chapter in God's story with humanity is about to be revealed. So during this eckstasis, this trance, Peter sees this giant sheet lowered from heaven, and it's filled with all kinds of animals that were strictly forbidden under Jewish law. And then a voice commands him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." I mean, Peter, as a devout Jew, is horrified. He flat out refuses, but the voice says it again and again, 3 times, with this cryptic message, "What God has made clean, do not call common." And Peter is left just completely baffled. What on earth could this possibly mean? And just as he's trying to figure out this bizarre vision, who shows up at his gate? Cornelius's men. The two visions are about to collide, and Peter is about to do something absolutely unthinkable. Break one of the biggest cultural and religious taboos of his day. Peter goes with the men and walks straight into the house of a Gentile. He even says it right out loud, acknowledging the massive rule he's breaking. And this is the moment where it all clicks. The vision suddenly makes sense. He realizes the dream wasn't really about food, it was about people. And then Peter delivers what is basically the thesis statement for this entire story. This is his radical aha moment. Truly, I understand that God shows no partiality. He gets it. Acceptance by God isn't about your ethnicity or your nationality. It's about having a sincere heart and doing what's right. Now, this one sentence from Peter opens up this really fascinating question that theologians have been wrestling with ever since. Can someone who isn't yet a believer actually do anything that is acceptable or pleasing to God? So one theological perspective says no, not really. It comes from an idea called total depravity. And the thinking is a person outside of faith is just fundamentally incapable of any action, no matter how good it might look on the surface, that can truly be pleasing to God. So, how does that square with what Peter just said? Well, the distinction is absolutely crucial. Peter is not saying that Cornelius earned his salvation with good deeds. The story makes it super clear he still needs to hear the message about Jesus. But Peter is saying that God saw and approved of Cornelius's sincere heart and his actions. God noticed that he was searching. And just in case anyone in the room or, anyone reading this story 2,000 years later had any doubts about Peter's radical new understanding, God provides a dramatic, undeniable confirmation. Just look at this sequence of events. While Peter is still talking, sharing the message of Jesus, the Holy Spirit falls on everyone in the room, all the Gentiles. The Jewish believers who came with Peter are described as being amazed. I mean, their minds are blown. This was not supposed to happen. This was the sign of belonging, the thing that happened at Pentecost, and it was being given to non-Jews. Peter's reaction is immediate. Hey, if God has accepted them, who are we to stand in the way? This was the divine exclamation point on the whole thing. It was undeniable proof that Peter's vision was right. The family of God was now officially, demonstrably open to all people, on the exact same terms, with no ethnic or cultural barriers. The wall had come crashing down. So the story of Cornelius and Peter is this incredibly powerful account of how God shattered cultural and religious prejudices to create a brand new, inclusive community. And it leaves us with a pretty challenging question, doesn't it? If the story is fundamentally about breaking down walls, what are the walls in our own communities and maybe even in our own hearts that we're being called to break down today?